Hey guys, this is National Master Kevin Yang back at it with another video. So we were in this position, right, against Benjamin, and we looked at this position, we were like, well, I remember thinking takes because I wanted to get my knight to d5. But I also looked at takes because I wanted to maybe support my route to f5. But the problem is, knight takes d4 is even better. And the reason is because we expose this weakness more, right? Because now after pawn takes, my queen can't get directly to that weakness as easily as knight takes and let's say either knight to c6 or knight to b5 or bishop to a3. Things are looking good for me. But I didn't play knight takes d4. I played pawn takes d4. And the backlash or the reason why this move is bad is the move that Benjamin played right after. Rook b4. I completely underestimated the power of this move. I thought, okay, well, I just go defend the pawn, and then bishop e6 happened. And I was worried. I was worried like crazy because I was thinking, well, d5, right? But bishop f5, ooh, this is terrible territory. Queen d1, no, rook takes c4, followed by rook to c2, or bishop to c2. So I was like, okay, well, I can't do that. How else can I defend this pawn? And I can only do it really in one safe way. Bishop to d5. Not going to give up the pawn yet. And here I was thinking, well, maybe black can play knight to c7. Maybe black can play queen to c7. Maybe black can play bishop takes d5 and bishop to f5. So after knight to c7, I was thinking, well, you take. If knight takes, I could think about maybe f5. Or I could think about bishop to a3, right? Because after bishop to a3, then it's okay, right? Let's say rook to b6, and let's say I could go knight to c3 and go for knight to d5, or I could think about maybe something like rook to d5, but it's all okay, right? Knight to c7 is fine. Then I looked at queen to c7. Oh, this got worrisome. I was like, oh, how do I defend this guy? How do I defend this guy, right? So I was like, well, if queen a3, then bishop takes d5. So I was thinking, well, queen a3, the rook's got to go back, right? And then I was like, wait, no. Wait, is that worth it for black? And then I said, well, it looks pretty worth it. So bishop takes d5, queen takes here. And I was like, oh, if takes and takes, right? If rook e1, then takes, and I'm probably close to losing here. But I don't know. Apparently I have to find rook a7, which I wouldn't have found it. I'm a human. I'm not a bot. So at this point I was thinking, ugh, I don't know, right? What do I do? What do I do? Do I just go back? Do I just go back to like a3? What do I do, right? Because then these guys get kind of easy to target. So let's start with something like queen to b7, right? Queen coming here, knight to c7, and I mean, it looks shaky. So it was not looking good in this position. But bishop f5 happened, which is also a really good move. I played queen to d1. I played queen to d1 because I said, well, I had two options here. I was going to play queen to f3 with the idea that maybe I could get in knight to g3 and knight takes f5. And I was thinking, well, if somebody needs to replace the bishop on d5, it should be the queen, because that way I have access to a3, and maybe I get to take on d6 one day. So that was my thought process, but I chose queen to d1 because I said, well, if knight to c7 and bishop to a3, I was thinking, well, knight takes d5, rook takes d5, but what I missed in this line, and eventually Benjamin played the move in a different variation, was the move rook to b3. So I saw up to this point, I said bishop a3, and I am sure the rook has to move, right? But the rook does not have to move. Knight takes d5, and if bishop takes b4, knight takes b4, rook takes d5, and the move rook to b3. Devastating. Bam, bam. King g1, bishop d3. I mean, that would be lights out for me, but thank goodness I was in the right place in the right time. So after queen d1, what else did I consider? Well, I probably considered the move bishop to e4, thinking that, okay, if takes, the pawn is targeted, but I saw in this position knight c3, and I was like, that's really good. And I want to add a note. So the thing with queen f3 is I wanted to play knight g3, right? But I sort of worried about how my pawn on d4 would be unprotected. So what I did was I played queen to d1 so I could keep supporting it. And now rook b3. It looks like a good move, right? We previously just talked about it in the variation where the rook takes on d5. Here, rook b3 is a winning move because take, king g1, and bishop d3. Now, when we look back at our game position, rook to b3 is met by queen takes and bishop to g2. So the bishop plays an extremely important role in defending my position. Bishop g2, and I was thinking, what happens after bishop e4, right? The shots are being fired at me. In my mind, I was going to play queen g3. But what I realized after the game is I had rook to a2. Just keep an eye on that g2 bishop in an indirect way. But what I calculated during the game was queen g3, bishop takes d4, rook e1, queen takes g2, and after a series of moves, I would end up with, well, yeah, in this position, I don't think I calculated rook e1 because I looked at the variation afterwards. There's bishop to c3. And I knew that I didn't really want to draw. I was fighting this whole time. So I was going to play something like rook to a3 maybe, because I know that there's really no rush. There's no more pressure that black can really put besides knight g7 and knight f5. That takes two moves. My rook e1 threat takes one move. So rook a3, knight g7, rook e1, and now queen takes, and this knight f5, and I would have to assume that this might be a little bit better for white, but it's not winning in any way. So in the game, bishop g2, bishop takes, queen d1. So at this point, I sort of knew, okay, I might be out of danger here. But after queen d1, I thought, okay, well, black is going to play bishop d3, right? Keep up the pressure. And then I calculated the move rook d5, and I was like, well, this has to be winning, right? Because queen takes, rook takes, these guys are in a line, and it's not looking good for black, right? So that is that line. So then I said, okay, well, black has to trade then. So take, bishop to c3. I like these tricks, but rook to a7. I could have also played rook to a8 and kept that pressure on the back rank, but I played rook a7, thinking, I'm not going to let you escape to c7. You're going to have to go through g7 and let me take that d6 pawn, right? Bishop c2, rook d5, bishop b4, and this bishop is now a pretty good bishop, right? The bishop can blockade my pawns from doing anything, and I want to make sure it's neutralized. So I play the move bishop to a3. Bishop to a3 basically says, you know what? You might be dominant after you get that bishop to c5. This pawn might be your fortress for now, but I'm going to trade it, because after we trade, then I'm going to play rook d2, threaten that bishop, and maybe secure that spot on d5 for my bishop. But what I also want to do is I want to keep the pressure up now. Rook a8. And the idea is, after a move like bishop to e6, I want to maybe try out something like c5. Pawn takes d8, and rook d to d8, for which this is happening, and, you know, the knight, once it moves, we take the rook goodies, right? But after rook d8, I was thinking, okay, if bishop f7, I have bishop to c6. And if king to f7, I probably have the same thing as well, right? So that's my threat. F takes, bishop e6, and now c5. Rook d8, rook f2, and now rook f8, and I win the game. But I'm telling you, man, it was tough. But let's recap it, right? The opening was nothing spectacular. I've just been telling you about the flexibility of the English. I'm not advertising you to play it, but it's a good opening for people who sort of like flexibility, who don't want to commit to anything, you know, because like in the open Sicilian, you commit to having to play against the Najdorf, and those are tricky positions. So in this position, I played d4 and a4, and it was a slow game, right? But the fact that I was able to play g5 and the knight was able to move back, like instead, like I said before, e6 would have been a pretty decent move. It might have looked weird to weaken this d6 pawn, but I think it was necessary. So we get to this point, I win a pawn, but here I don't make the right capture. Knight takes d4 is the right capture, but I take with a pawn and I come under some counterplay. But luckily our friend blunders with rook to b3, and after that, it's mostly smooth sailing, but I have to say, this was a topsy-turvy game again. So, I hate to say it, but I got lucky again. So, chess is just teensy bit luck, but if you have the goods, if you had the trades, if you've got everything you need, and you keep doing those puzzles and practice on International Chess Day, you'll be okay. So, I'll see you next time.